People who mark exams. What is the funniest thing you've seen in an exam? Story 1 in microeconomics. There was a question about consumer goods, and this guy wrote an entire answer comparing and contrasting consumer goods and consumer bads, which was basically a short answer of what you should and shouldn't do in a retail store. Funny. Story 2, I once marked a calculus test where a student scored 0. Turns out the student copied the answers off the student next to him, but didn't realize that there were 2 different versions of the test to prevent this exact scenario. Honestly, I was impressed. Outside of submitting a blank test, I've never seen someone get 0. Edit for the aftermath teacher pulled the kid aside the next day and called him, and he told him he'd let him off the hook with a warning this time, since he can't give him much lower than a 0, and he didn't think detention would help things. Story 3 on a university-level ecotoxicology exam, where the question was, is the process slow or fast? No explaining required. The student answered yes. Story 4 final project. Someone once named one of their variables in their MATLAB code motherfucking bitch. There were other unconventional variable names, but this one sticks with me. Edit students assume you want read their attached code. Wrong. Story 5. There was always at least one chem exam that took a complicated reaction mechanism question and just wrote magic between the starting and ending compounds. Story 6 on a quiz where the students had to fill in 7 missing values on an array calculation. One of the students completely forgot how to do the calculations, and so had no answers. My school grades on a 1 to 4 scale. So, anticipating his failure, he wrote into the spaces 1I2 will 3 have 4 to 5, take 6 is 7 1. So happened that it was a correlation coefficient equation, and the final answer was in fact 998. I told him it was close enough, so I gave him credit for that one. He still only got 17, which was not a passing grade of course, but he had a good laugh. Story 7 red blood cells are described as disc-shaped in most books. One of my classmates had his test paper marked with a big on that question because he wrote shaped cell. Story 8, this was hanging on the wall of one of my mesh professor's office. The following is an actual question given on University of Washington engineering midterm. The answer was so profound that the professor shared it with colleagues, which is why we now have the pleasure of enjoying it as well. Bonus question, is exothermic gives off heat or endothermic absorbs heat? Most of the students wrote proofs of their beliefs using Boyle's law. Gas cools off when it expands and heats up when it is compressed, or some variant. One student, however, wrote the following first. We need to know how the mass of is changing in time. So we need to know the rate that souls are moving into and the rate they are leaving. I think that we can safely assume that once a soul gets to, it will not leave. Therefore, no souls are leaving. As for how many souls are entering, let's look at the different religions that exist in the world today. Some of these religions state that if you're not a member of their religion, you will go to. Since there are more than one of these religions, and since people do not belong to more than one religion, we can project that all souls go to. With birth and death rates as they are, we can expect the number of souls to increase exponentially. Now, we look at the rate of change of the volume in, because Boyle's law states that in order for the temperature and pressure to stay the same, the volume of has to expand as souls are added. This gives 2 possibilities. If it's expanding at a slower rate than the rate at which souls enter, then the temperature and pressure will increase until all breaks loose. Of course, if it's expanding at a rate faster than the increase of souls in, then the temperature and pressure will drop until freeze is over. So which is it? If we accept the postulate given to me by Teresa Banyan during my freshman year, that it will be a cold day and before I sleep with you, and take into account the fact that I still have not succeeded in having relations with her, then 2 cannot be true, and thus I am sure that is exothermic and will not freeze. This student received the only A final exam on Macbeth. One of my friends didn't know how to answer a question, but because we were told never to leave it blank, wrote a detailed instructional with pictures on how to draw a horse. He got partial marks for communication. Story 9, someone I know on their organic chemistry exam that they knew they bombed because they only answered 2 out of 5 questions, drew a tombstone with RIP, my grade in one of the blank question spaces. The grading TA drew bouquets of flowers at the tombstone in red pen, and everyone laughed except for the guy whose exam it was. Story 10 obligatory. I'm not a teacher, but when I was a freshman in high school, I took world religions and completely bombed the question on Hinduism. Having skipped that chapter, my only knowledge of Eastern religions was what I saw in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. It was all there in my answer: thuggy cults, Mola Ram, sacred stones, lava pits, hearts being ripped out, child slaves. It was a 20-point question. I got 0 points. The comment I got back was something like, this is the most wrong answer I have ever seen to this question. Story 11, I was the TA for a chemistry class. Someone who clearly had not study for the exam, didn't bother to answer any of the questions. Instead, he drew a car on the last page of the exam. It was one of the most beautiful drawings I'd ever seen. So beautiful I felt terrible giving this guy an F. The details, the shadowing, the curves, all was amazing. More so that he did that in 50 minutes. He dropped the class halfway through the semester, and I don't know what happened to him after, but I really hope he switched major to something more art-related. Story 12 in a Year 10 history essay about the Labor and Liberal parties during the war period, talking about various scandals, including accusations of an affair with the secretary. The climax came in the party room, before going on to talk about how the coalition crumbled. Sure, it was deliberate. 1 point to you, student. Marking a Year 11 GCSE English practice exam, where one of the writing tasks is to explain why victimization is a bad thing and what the negative effects could be. The class I was teaching were the bottom of the barrel, but a pleasant enough group. I changed the wording on the exam to bullying rather than victimization, because it would just confuse them. One kid responds with, word for word as best as I can remember, you shouldn't bully people because they might know Conor McGregor, and if you hurt them then he will come to your house and kill you. Think about it. Would you really want to bully someone who was friends with Conor McGregor? That was it, despite the fact that the kid obviously had to write a lot more. I did in my feedback with, but technically, you're not wrong. Story 13, this wasn't my marking of an exam, but a friend of mine, she was writing a thermodynamics exam for engineering and forgot the formula for solids and could only recall for gases. So she wrote assumed potato is gas and continued on her way, still passed the course. Story 14, when you grade written exams, it's just a constant stream of stupidity. But one of my all-time favorites was something to the effect of the French were up there in Canada slang infer to describe the reason for French colonialism. Edit to all of you saying they weren't wrong. There's a big difference between not being wrong and being correct. There, I help you out today. Story 15, personal apologies to me as their teacher. I remember one time a student skipped writing the final essay question and instead wrote a full page on why I should pass them regardless of the fact that they have no idea what the question is about. I felt kind of guilty marking it 0. LOL, edit wow. My highest rated comment is about one of my students. That's sad, LOL. Story 16, answering for my mother. The question was the following crash test dummies are made to be as realistic as possible to ensure that crash tests produce the most accurate results possible. State a feature about them that makes them realistic. The students answer, it has the mind of a dead person. Story 17, I'm nearly done with my PhD and do a ton of grading as a graduate student. I always think it is so funny how people who never come to class are clueless about content, write complete bullshit essays so confidently. Last week, I had someone write multiple pages about non-existent academic debates in comparative politics. The writing and structure was very strong, but it was all just bullshit. Story 18, helped mark an exam for a science Olympiad competition once. The main proctor was a good-looking girl who actually administered the test. I just helped grading. One of the exams came back blank. Save something along the lines of you're really hot. Can I have your number? I was flattered. Story 19, I grade a test used by people studying English as a second language to show their proficiency. One of the sections is a listening test where they listen to a conversation and have to answer questions about it. What's common on this portion is people hear a word that is unfamiliar to them, but they have enough skill to sound it out and attempt to spell it. One test I was grading had as an answer country. This guy did his best to spell out and offered up country. I admired his attempt. Another portion is a writing test, where they're given a simple prompt and just have to write on the topic. It doesn't matter how well they form an argument or anything, they just need to write enough that we can see their use of English. On one test, there was a question about snacks. Something like, what are some of your favorite snacks? This one response, clearly confused snack for a similar sounding word. He basically wrote, I'm strongly opposed to snacks. Snacks aren't good in my opinion. I know a lot of people like snacks and keep them around, but that is a bad idea. Some people even give snacks to kids, and this is bad. Snacks shouldn't be in the home. They should be outside, away from people. Snacks can bite, and their bite is deadly. I don't know why people keep snacks as pets when they're so dangerous. I do not like snacks. Story 20, obligatory, not a teacher, but I was going through some old stuff a couple years ago and found a cache of selected papers from my high school days, graduated in 1988. Included in the cache was an AP biology exam that included a short essay section set up in the format of choose 2 of the 4 questions to answer. You can answer a third for extra credit if you so desire. I chose 2 and gave fairly bland but relatively complete answers to them. The kind of answers that get you 13-15 points or such. For the extra credit option, I chose the one that said, using a basic hamburger bun and meat only, explain the complete workings of the digestive tract from end to end. I wrote it as a child's story called Mr. Hamburger Gets Digested using very short and simple sentences. I illustrated it in places. According to the comment on the document, my instructor found this absolutely hilarious, but also accurate. I got maximum credit. Story 21. Many moons ago, I was marking math school certificate exams, end of year, 10 common external exams. Can't remember the question, but I'll always remember the answer. I don't know, I'm only in standard. Damn it. Story 22. When I was taking Calculus 2 in university, I didn't know how to solve one of the final essay questions. I drew a piata with a sombrero instead, got partial credit on the question. Story 23. I had a food technology exam and was so frustrated I basically made pot noodle as a recipe. Pretty sure the teacher knew I was taking but I got full marks because it was technically not wrong. Story 24. I'm not a teacher, but, well, technically speaking, I was a teacher a long time ago. I got the story about my uncle. He did an engineering degree in agriculture one day. In some exam, a friend was pestering my uncle about sharing answers. He was annoyed and did tell him the first thing that it did come to his mind. Next day, the teacher returns the graded exams, but the last one was his friend's. Then the teacher proceeded to read the question and the answer. This is a very unusual answer, but it was too good to leave it unnoticed. How you do control a plague of mice in a corn plantation? 3 cats per acre. It did happen 30 years ago, and we still give to his friend about it. Story 25. Student paper. Not an exam, but still, student history paper comes in, obviously plagiarized. I get to the end of it, and a stupid little left the copyright notice from Microsoft Encarta, obviously the source on the end of his paper. I call the student up at the end of class. Is this your work? Yes. Are you sure you didn't copy this? Yes. I show him the copyright notice. What is this? I don't know. I bring up the website with the entry that makes up pretty much all his paper. So are you telling me Microsoft copied your paper? What? Huh. Forward several days. TO, parent-teacher conference. Repeat this dog and pony show with Dr. Dad and lawyer mom insisting their child does not plagiarize because they're a doctor and a lawyer and their kid could do no wrong. Not a bit of it registered for them either. I failed their son for the semester, not just for the paper. My vice principal changed the grade to a D without consulting or informing me because of the parents' pressure, and that, among other reasons, is why I quit teaching. Edit typo. Story 26. There was a question on a physics exam to explain the forces acting on an airplane. Supposed to be something like this. Instead, the student wrote the air B on bottom and the air B on top, the plane B right in the middle. Story 27. A poor girl didn't understand word transformations English exam for non-English speakers. Transform the bold word my dad will retire in a few years. He's looking forward to his. She writes death edit for the confused. Word transformations means forming a new word using the base word. It's a term from language teaching, not from formal linguistics, so govern can be transformed to governed, government, governor, governability, ungovernable, governess, etc. My favorite was a real test item from Cambridge that required students to get dismemberment from member. Story 28. On my AP US history exam, I gave up on an essay question about the effects of the American Revolution and wrote out the lyrics for America. Yeah, from Team America, I had a syntax class, which means on exams our students had to draw a lot of syntax trees. As you can imagine, staring at these diagrams for hours at a time can get dull. My one student's trees weren't exactly funny, but refreshingly creative. She drew her trees with a Wacom tablet and included pleasant little loop-de-loops and used color for different words. Sure, maybe it wasn't 100 in line with formal notation standards, but her trees were always pretty good, and the little flourishes made me smile. Wish I could show an example for you all without breaking FERPA. Story 29. Years ago, in high school, I took AP Spanish at a public school. The AP exam had a speaking portion, which we all had to record simultaneously on these old cassette recorders. These things manipulated our voices to the point where we sounded like highly excited kittens taking hits of helium. Now imagine 40 teens in one echoey room. That poor grader. Story 30. I was in grade 12, and our teacher asked us to help her out marking some grade 8 stuff. She handed out the tests, and then we all went through it. With her reading the answers to each question, it came to the human reproductive system, and the grade 8s were asked to draw the male and female reproductive cells, i.e. a cell and an egg cell. With the test, I was marking the dude drew a penis and a crude vagina, with an arrow pointing for clarification. Also, bonus one, my daughter got demerits for an answer on one of her English lit tests. When I checked it out, the question was something along the lines of what was the symbolism the author was creating with this line. Her answer, I don't know. Why don't you ask the author? She got a high five from me. And then a stern warning not to do that again. A friend of mine wrote in the answer space, I don't know the answer, because teacher's name did not cover this topic as a joke, but forgot to erase it before submitting it. Needless to say, my teacher wasn't too impressed, haha. Story 31. I give a practical course on digital signal processing. The students have to use and modify some Python code we provide and analyze the results. They deliver a Jupyter notebook with their report. along with some auxiliary files and a zip file. A couple of funny things happened this semester. First, a couple of students send me a zip file with their report, along with a report from a previous semester they copied from. Second, a couple of students send me a report, and one of the ID numbers doesn't match any of theirs. I look up the wrong ID number and find that it is from a student in a different group for the same course. I compare several of their reports and find plagiarism in a couple of them. My students are really dumb. Story 32, I once scored a test where a student did not fill in the bubble entirely. There was another test where a student filled in 2 bubbles for the same answer. Both of those incidents were humorous. Also, I am definitely a human and not a scantron. Story 33, grading states, standardized tests for 3rd graders. The question, what is the official name of the national anthem? Most kids knew, or sort of knew the answer, but their spelling was hilarious. Star Stankled Bonjour, Stam Strangler Banjo. Story 34, in high school, I had a biology exam on a day when I was sick as, instead of getting a doctor's note and missing the exam until I was better, I tried to write it. So, I had no idea most of the stuff on this exam. Last question is explaining plant self-pollination versus being pollinated by other plants in genetic terms. I had no idea what to do, so I wrote in about a page about a seri reproduction and a seri-seri reproduction versus a seri other species reproduction and the culture around it. I got part marks because I kind of hit some of the points he wanted and because it amused him. Story 35, the best one that I have, is this one kid taped 3 pennies to his test after I said to write a 3-paragraph essay with the paragraph symbol. He still wrote the essay too. Story 36, just today my colleague was troubled by a student who wrote that solar energy is a form of non-renewable energy. The student argued that if the sun were to die, we cannot renew it, and that makes it non-renewable. Well, technically. Story 37, I was taking algorithms in college, and on one of the homeworks we had to solve a problem in which a man and a lion are in a ring together. The lion would always move as fast as the man and in a straight line towards him. The goal was to develop an algorithm that would give the man a path that would make it so the lion never caught him. This is a known problem with a real solution. But I took advantage of the poor wording. It was late the night before it was due, and said if the lion only moves as fast as the man, then all the man has to do is stand still. Since the lion didn't start on top of the man, and the man stood still, the lion would have to stand still, and the man would never be caught. QED, the TA wrote haha no on my answer, and gave me a 0. Story 38, professor that I tagged for would have an animal of the semester, let's call it Snubkins. He would mention it in class, in tests, and so forth, encouraging students to draw Snubkins if they finished exams or quizzes early since they were not allowed to leave. Final exam comes around. A student, instead of doing the coding questions, writes an essay about how some Snubkins aren't meant to code. Story 39, I need a XX to pass this class. If I get this, find me on Facebook, and I will bake you cookies. This is not a bribe. I will just be very happy. Hush have failed. Story 40, I was proctoring for a statistics final exam, and 5 minutes past the start time, a student stood up, gathered her things, and turned in the final exam to the professor. It was completely blank, except for a little note on the top, sorry, I don't know anything. Story 41, computer science TA, first time I graded. The student needed to use lower to turn to lowercase, but instead they did replace A, replace B, B, replace C, C. Simplest question on the exam, but the student wrote out a full page. Still worked, so I gave them full credit. Story 42, this isn't me, but I have a couple of tutors who have been exam markers at various times. My maths tutor told me about one paper where the guy had just marked y over a quadratic equation question. My favorite, though, is the paper my Chinese teacher marked. It was a Chinese essay, and it started well, but the guy just stopped mid-sentence to write why the do you want to torture me, you little shits. My lie's enough as it is without all of your bullshit double underlines. I give up. Go on, my. She gave him 5 marks out of 20. I don't mark tests, but when I was in high school, we did peer grading of tests one time freshman year. My friend was in the class, but you got the test by random friend, not the brightest kid, but he was pretty funny. I looked at his test going over Romeo and Juliet, and one of the answers was, I don't know this. Just give me the points here, and he'll change the answer when I get it back. I looked at him, and he gave me a nod, and I proceeded to do so. Instances where I ran were on the standardized test that didn't really matter for college. I took the multiple choice, and at the end for the essay questions, I just put, yeah, you can have fun with this, and drew a giraffe and a very small man for scale. My friend for his AP psychology final drew a rocket ship because he already got into college and didn't care. Story 43, one of my friends was poor at calculus. It was calculus test in my high school. He wrote fail to load, press F5 to refresh. The teacher laughed on it. Story 44, not a teacher, But a freshman, I just took a test involving root words where we had to write the definition, 3 words including the root, and a sentence for every single sentence. I picked a random word with the root and put I sure wish I knew what word with root meant. Wasn't specified in the directions or stated before the test. Oh, write an update on the score I will be given. Update, I got an A. Story 45 when taking a geography exam my freshman year of college. My teacher stated in the exam, in 1619-20 Africans were brought to the English colony of Jamestown, Virginia. Historians are undecided if the legal practice of slavery began there, since at least some of them had the status of indentured servant. With this in mind, draw a triceratops wearing glasses. Story 46, I used to help my grade spelling test for 3rd graders, and one boy had excellent handwriting until he couldn't remember how to spell a word. That's when certain letters would start to look suspiciously similar and closer together. I guess he thought if the teacher couldn't quite make out the word, she would just give him the benefit of the doubt. Story 47, I have one from both sides. Back in college, I had to take Photoshop classes. I hate Photoshop. I never understood anything out of it, and I always feel so stupid when I use it. So I told my teacher, who was very understanding of my situation, if I could do my style of work during that semester. I agreed to take a couple grades down if it was too stupid of a work, but to try and be fair with me, since I would actually try to make something good, I did terrible stuff all year long, coming into semester project, and I had to create a poster that represents me and how I would present myself to people if they asked a screenshot of my life. So I did a mashup of all the terrible current memes. It had like all the old stuff, Pepe, Kappa, but why impossible, BRUH, and so on. It was actually incredible, and I put like 30 hours in it. I got an A with the mention. I don't get any of it, but the techniques are pretty good. Congrats. It was my Facebook profile photo for like 3 years after that. I once had to correct some Spanish tests with a teacher that needed help one day. It was entry-level Spanish for 13-year-old kids. The assignment was write a short story in Spanish, 200 words minimum. Other kids did some terrible job at writing fiction stuff, or just wrote what happened in that day at home, or something cute. But this kid probably thought better of it. He copied an entire Harry Potter chapter in Google Translate and printed the result in a Word doc. It was like 6 pages long. I wrote nice try, but I already read that book. Apparently the kid tried to tell that teacher it was his own story. A little edit since I got asked to show the meme collage. Here it is. It's in French, but it says, welcome to the Dank Meme Show. Pretty dank. And let's say it's also meme Y. Story 48, sometimes students write really long-winded notes on their exams begging me not to fail them for a second time. Since they'd have to drop out of their program, those are the best ones to fail because they obviously didn't learn a thing from taking the course twice, and it's a first-year course. Then again, this might only be funny to me. Story 49, I had a grown man scribble notes in the margins detailing how questions could be worded better, how the graph should be bigger, gave me examples of better questions, and even wrote me sentences about how I'm trying to trick him by making C the obvious answer, but D was the correct one. He did not do nearly as well as he thought he did. Story 50, okay. So, I don't mark exams, but I took 3 AP tests in the past week. So I'm going to talk about how I kept myself entertained during them anyway. So on the AP Comp Sci exam, you need to write some code for the open response. So after finishing 45 minutes in and having another 45 minutes of boredom left, I decided to spice up my variables' names with some good old communism. Kept track of the free elections by counting the number of sickles and hammers. Make sure the code word is valid and doesn't contain the forbidden string, Trotsky. Once Lenin is no longer true, Stalin takes its place. My favorite section of code, by far Eifleader, equals Gloria's Pride in Motherland 1. Story 51 in 10th grade, our county has a gateway about a social studies topic which determines if you can graduate or not. My teacher showed me a past essay where a kid drew the best eagle that I've seen in my life. He didn't write a single word for the essay, just a brilliantly drawn eagle that took him 3 hours. Definitely not what the prompt was asking for when it asked about the American Revolution. Story 52, my classmate was taking a class for pre-calc, and when he couldn't answer most of the questions in the test, so he got scrap paper and taped a 20 on it with the words, please, I need to pass this class. Story 53, so this is from the other side, but I often wonder how it was received by the professor. Had a class, I don't even remember the subject now, and the professor was a guest professor. He pretty clearly seemed to not give much of about teaching this particular class. Every class we were assigned to read the next chapter or whatever and come up with a question. Then in class, everyone read the question they came up with aloud for everyone to copy down. These questions were then used to make the test later as well. I had a perfect 100 in the class going into the final. The final was supposed to be 13 of our grade. The final test, though, was completely different from all the previous with no warning despite the fact that we had continued in the exact same way in class right up to that point. About a month before the exam, he had spent a day giving an actual lecture on a topic that I forget now, but it was like 5 or 6 particular points. The final exam was one essay question list and explain those 5 or 6 things. I remember the lecture was a thing, but could only remember a couple of the points because I hadn't studied that particular thing, because why would I? So for an answer, I basically wrote something like I was in class every day, and I remember this topic, but I only recall these couple points because I prepared for this the same as the previous exams with no expectation this would be different. And, oh, by the way, I got perfect scores on those, and I don't appreciate being ambushed like this. If that exam was 13 of our grade, then based on the actual information I put in my response, I probably should have gotten a C for that class. I didn't see how that exam was marked, but my final grade for the class was an A. Story 54, not a teacher. But as a student in high school history, another student started out his essay about the causes of the American Civil War as you would, then halfway through started outlining the plot to Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. I may still have a photo of the essay. It was too funny. Story 55. It's comfortable to do it with a teacher. Student talking about doing exercises while a teacher is there to help you. I'm sitting on my bed and am eating a Kaki. If it isn't obvious, I teach English as a foreign language. Story 56. I'll never forget a physics exam I had. I nailed this thing except for one question where I couldn't remember one of the 2 names. This is 25 years ago, and to this day, I still remember the answer. It was about the Fizeau-Foucault apparatus. I could remember Foucault's name, but not Fizeau, so I just answered Foucault and his buddy. I got a 99. Story 57, grading an anatomy and physiology test question. Explain the conjugation of bilirubin, which is a process that takes place in the liver. The student actually answered the essay correctly. Then the smartass went on to conjugate the verb like you would if you were studying a language. I conjugate bilirubin, you singular conjugate bilirubin, we conjugate bilirubin, he conjugates bilirubin, she conjugates bilirubin, it conjugates bilirubin, you plural conjugate bilirubin, they conjugate bilirubin. Story 58, as a student teacher with a couple weeks under my belt, I thought it would be interesting to see how much the students pay attention. So I finished a quiz with the question, what is the student teacher's name? Mr. Awesome, Mr. Man Who Teaches Us and Has a Beard, Mr. Rogers Sarah Jessica Parker. Story 59, obligatory, not a teacher, but I recently had a midterm on leadership in companies. This involved a lot of subjects, including communication and culture. One of these subjects is a culture onion. I had to draw this and then explain what the onion meant and how it worked. It was worth a lot of points. I couldn't explain it properly and started about how it was the same as in Shrek, that a culture has layers and you couldn't get to one layer without first going through the others. I thought I bombed this test, failed it, but I got an 8 out of 10. Apparently, it wasn't the exact answer she was looking for, but it showed that I did understand it to the level she was looking for, and simplifying it to Shrek made her laugh and understand exactly what I meant. Story 60, the prompt was draw out or explain the TCA cycle. Instead, the student drew what he described as the THC cycle, where the first step was a dude obtaining a blunt, the next step was the dude lighting the blunt, and finally the dude getting high, where once he was sober again, the cycle restarted. I really wish I could say the kid got a high score on the exam, but instead he probably just got high. Story 61, not me. But my sister told me she had to answer a question on a music test or the like, but she didn't know the answer, so she had the brilliant idea to fill in the question by mentioning how sloths fall to their deaths by grabbing after their own arms, thinking they're branches. Story 62, the question lists 3 types of contraception. The answer: condoms, birth control pills, blue suede shoes. This was in high school. The teacher was me. Our final exam was teaching a class period on a assigned topic and give the class a 5-question quiz. My topic was reproduction. Of course, I knew who the kid was. He was a classmate. I asked him why he wrote that. He said he didn't feel like thinking about it. It was the end of the school year, and we were all a little fried. I still laugh about that one when I remember it. Story 63, am not really like a teacher or anything, but I work at an after-school program for kids, and I have to check their homework before they're allowed to play educational games or whatever. One time, a girl in 2nd grade had a worksheet where she had to match 3 letter words with their longer synonyms, things like fad, trend, and stuff like that. The funny thing was she got most of the answers right, but she switched up dad and sad. So she wrote dad depressed, and I thought it was hilarious. Story 64, we had a cooking exam where we had to cook 1 full meal, and the teachers would try and then determine how we did. Now, I took cooking for a year and then dropped it because I could not cook like at all, so I was super worried. In the end, I made glorified soup. Threw a load of veggies in a pan with some stock, add a load of herbs, and that was it. I even put bread out with no butter. The teacher literally said, I can't fail you because this is technically 1 full meal, but I wish I could. I dropped it quite quickly. Story 65. I don't mark exams, but I was in school as a little kid, and we had a spelling test. I stayed up all night studying. I aced the test, but spelled my name wrong, and I got made fun for the whole year. Story 66. It was not an exam that I marked personally, but I always get a chuckle out of the Caltech physics student who had an open book exam that said you can use the textbook or Feynman. So he went down to Feynman's office and got him to take the exam. My own funniest was on planetary science. The question was, what is the Oort cloud? And the student wrote a friendly cloud that hides behind Jupiter and jumps out at passing spaceships yelling Oort. Oort. There was even a little sketch of a cloud wearing a smile and a jetpack.